Let's look at number 11. The directions say to write a rule. It wants us to write it in words, in component form, only if it's a translation, and in coordinate notation. And we're writing them in order to describe the transformation that's given. So the first thing you want to notice is which figure has the prime symbols on it and which one does not. Remember, the one with the prime symbols is the image. It's what you're transforming to. And so here I have an N prime, T prime, V prime, and M prime. So this quadrilateral, which happens to be a kite in this case, is the quadrilateral that I'm transforming to. So this is my original figure, the pre-image, MNTV. And so the first thing I always want to look for is a translation. Those are the easiest of the transformations. Remember, that's just a slide. Well, this kite is not facing the same way as this kite, so it's not just a slide. So we can eliminate a translation, which means we don't have to write component form since it's not a translation. The next thing I would look for is a reflection. The easiest reflections are across the y-axis or the x-axis. If we had reflected across the y-axis, N prime would be the same distance from y on the opposite side. And that's not where our N prime ends up. So it's not a reflection across the y-axis. If we reflected across the x-axis, N is 2 units above the x, it would end up 2 units below the x, and that's not where N prime is. So we're not reflecting across the x-axis. If we reflect across the line y equals x, which remember is this line going through the origin with a slope of 1, we switch the x and y coordinates places. So this point, -1, 2, would end up at 2, -1, and that's not where my N prime is. If we were reflecting across y equals opposite x, which also goes through the origin but has a slope of -1, then the coordinates switch places and change signs. So -1, 2 would end up at -2, 1. -2, 1 is here, and that's not where my N prime is. So we can eliminate our basic reflections, which means our last transformation to try is a rotation. So with rotations, the first thing I would look at is which direction I'm going. Since N is in the second quadrant and N prime is in the third quadrant, my rotation is going in this direction, which we call counterclockwise. So I already know I have a rotation. I know the direction is counterclockwise. Remember, the other two pieces of information I need are the number of degrees I'm rotating and around which point I'm rotating. So the next thing I'm going to look at is the number of degrees. With the number of degrees, since I'm going from the second quadrant to the third quadrant, that's a fourth of a turn. And so that would be a 90-degree rotation. A fourth of 360 degrees is 90 degrees. So remember, the point I'm rotating around and the image point will make a right angle. So I'm going to check the origin because that's the easiest point to rotate around. And when I look at connecting N prime, N, and the origin, it does make that right angle right there. So that's a 90-degree rotation counterclockwise around the origin, which is the point 0, 0. So you can say origin or 0, 0, either one. You can also check the coordinates to make sure that it follows that rule. So you need to know the rule for a 90-degree rotation counterclockwise. Counterclockwise, remember from number 9, I draw an arrow the counterclockwise direction, reminding me which of the coordinates to change signs on as I switch the places. So this is telling me the y is the one that's changing spaces and changing signs. So it would map to opposite y, x. So let's try point N, for instance. N is at the coordinates -1, 2. And let's look at N prime. N prime's coordinates are -2, -1. Did they follow this rule? Is this the opposite of my y-coordinate? Yes, the opposite of 2 is negative 2. Is this my x-coordinate? Yes, it's negative 1. So that makes me feel good about my description of a 90-degree rotation counterclockwise around the origin. So I've written my rule in words. I can't write it in component form because it's not a translation. And I did write it in coordinate notation as well. Right here is the coordinate notation. And remember, that's using the rules from worksheet 8.